Welcome back to Lit by the Fire. It has been a few weeks, but we are here to finish Barbi McSwain's story, The Mountain. We left off with quite a cliffhanger as Johann was infected with some kind of doubt seed placed in his mind. Who knows what's about to happen, but we will be finishing this book to the last chapter today. So, without further ado, let us get into it with chapter 20, Doubt Takes Root. When Johann awoke, the forest was dark. Insects hummed and chirped. Tree branches partially blocked a full moon shining in the night sky overhead. Johann was thankful for its light, otherwise the forest would be black as pitch. "Michael," he whispered. He shook his friend. "Wake up!" Michael opened his eyes and sat up. "I think we took more than 15 minutes. Yeah, now what? It's too dark to keep going. You hungry?" "Starving." Michael fumbled in his pack for Kynard's other parcel. It was smashed and crumpled, but somehow still dry. He opened it, and the boys shared the food. As they ate, Johann absently scratched his ear. He stuck his fingertip in his ear and wiggled it forcefully. Then his thoughts went back to Broken Pass. "You know, there's something I never told you about Broken Pass. When all those boulders came down and that bridge was broken." "Yeah? I saw a good master up there. I think he pushed the boulders and broke that bridge on purpose." "Well, that's crazy. Why would he do that?" "I don't know." "Well, what difference does it make? A better one fell out of the forest, remember?" "Yeah, that's right." "So where's this stone of suffering anyway?" "I don't know. We should get some sleep. We can find the path in the morning." Michael laid on his side with his head on his pack and curled his knees up. Johann lay back against his pack, looking at the moon, the incident at Broken Pass crystallizing in his thoughts. All he could see was the good master pushing boulders onto the only bridge that crossed the pass. Why would good master do that to them? Maybe he didn't want Johann to find the treasure. Maybe good master couldn't be trusted at all. He scratched his ear and closed his eyes. In the morning, Johann awoke feeling refreshed and invigorated. He looked at Michael, who was sitting up, reaching for a drink of water from his flagon. He took a drink, then poured some water over his head and splashed his face. Then he looked at Johann. "I'm hungry," he smiled. Johann thought about Kynard and her warm hearth with its brown bread baking and side meat sizzling. His stomach grumbled so loudly that Michael heard it. There was no more food in their packs. "Well, we better get going. Maybe we can find something to eat along the way. Hey, look, there's a path up ahead." They had walked about a mile, winding through the forest. There was no tree which bore any kind of fruit or nut. No vine grew on the ground with berries. Johann's ear began to itch again. He trudged on, scratching his ear and thinking, "You know, it's strange that boat was there at the river." "You mean lucky." "I don't know. Why didn't it have any oars? We couldn't steer it. If those giant flying creatures hadn't been looking for a snack, we'd be fish food right now." "Well, Goodmaster said he'd provide a way of escape, and we escaped. So what's your point?" "I don't think it was a way of escape. I think it was a way to get rid of us, and we just got lucky. He's not trying to help us at all." "Have you lost your mind? I'm telling you, we shouldn't trust him. What's in this for him, anyway?" A new thought occurred to Johann, and he looked at Michael as if seeing him for the first time. "You're in cahoots with him. The two of you are just using me to get the treasure because you couldn't find it yourself." Michael stopped and looked around. His eyes widened with fear. "Johann, what's wrong with you?" Johann scratched at his ear again and faced his friend. "Oh no!" Michael shouted and lunged toward Johann, knocking him down. Michael grabbed at Johann's ear as if he wanted to rip it off. Johann fought back, but their cumbersome packs only pulled them to the ground like magnets. Johann, listen to me! Michael shouted and rolled to grab Johann's ear, but Johann knocked Michael's hand away. What is wrong with you? Get away from me! The boys scrambled to their feet. Michael reached again for his ear. Johann raised a fist, ready to land a blow, but bewilderment prevented him from hitting his friend. Unable to keep him away, Johann finally threw his punch and knocked Michael down. Michael sprang to his feet and tackled Johann, then grabbed his ear. He jerked something out of it, and Johann felt his ear pop, as it sometimes did when he shook his head after they went swimming in the creek. Michael fell back to sit beside him and dangled a tiny vine in his hand. Attached to the end was a large brown seed. Someone planted a seed of doubt in your ear, my friend, Michael announced, smiling triumphantly. I saw the little vine sticking out of your ear. I was wondering why you've been scratching like you have fleas. I thought maybe you needed a bath. Johann's thoughts began to clear. Goodmaster wasn't his enemy. What was he thinking? Who did that to me? This is the work of Abernathy Sullivan. He must have found us last night in the forest. Oh, good thing I got it out, huh? Once again, Johann was indebted to his friend, but instead of thanking him, all he could do was nod his head. Come on, Michael said. We gotta get to that stone if Sullivan is after us. Without sharp swords, no telling what he can do to us. The boys stood up and dusted themselves off. They proceeded down the path laughing. Johann took the little vine from Michael and threw it far into the forest. A shadow moved in and out of the sunlight that filtered and flickered through the treetops to the forest floor below. It slunk in and out of the trees, dragging a filthy tail. Milligrub hobbled quickly through the dry leaves, trying to catch up to his master. He stopped abruptly when his hairy foot felt an unfamiliar lump on the dirt. He squatted down and saw the seed of doubt with its dangling sprout and grinned greedily. No one but his master could touch these. He put it in his vest pocket before his master had time to sense he had fallen behind and resumed his trek. The lion stopped and sniffed the air. Milligrub, his little arms pumping hard and his hairy feet pounding the ground as fast as they could go, finally caught up to him. Where have you been? The lion voiced. Why must it be so hard for you to keep up? Oh, I have short legs, and only 2 of them. Oh, why, for every one of your 4 steps I have to take. Milligrub counted on his fingers and rolled his eyes upward, calculating. 8! 8 steps, because 2 times 4. A dusty tail whopped him upside the head, knocking him down. They've been here, look. When Milligrub stood up, dusting off his backside, the ponderous Abernathy Sullivan stood before him, pointing at the path. They were fighting. Oh, this is good. Yes, very good. I believe the seed of doubt has taken root. Soon they will be on their way home. Come on. There's no more we need to do here. What are you smiling about? He snarled when he saw the little creature grinning at the path. Oh, I mean nothing. I mean, I'm happy it worked. Yes, the seed of doubt worked. How nice. How very nice. Milligrub looked back to see the lion plodding his way back through the forest. He followed him. But now he was absorbed in a project of his own. Seed harvesting. It would take a lot of time and patience, but he could conceivably grow his own seeds of doubt. That could prove to be a profitable business someday. Ow! He stubbed his toe on a root and tumbled into a low bush. Scrambling out of the branches and thorny leaves, he proclaimed to no one, Oh, I'm all right. He looked around and checked his pocket for the valuable seed. It was safe. He sighed contentedly and proceeded through the trees. The path the boys followed began to incline, and wind around boulders and trees until they had to pull themselves straight up the side of the mountain. Johann took hold of a root, making sure it was secure, before trying to use it to scale the steep path. He climbed up to a tree that grew out of the mountainside and rested against its trunk. He saw Michael down below, carefully maneuvering his way up. When Michael finally reached him, Johann offered his hand to pull him up. Johann firmly grasped his waist with both hands, but just as Michael pushed off a rock, it gave way, causing him to lose his balance and dangle on the cliff. Johann pulled him up to safety. Michael leaned against the mountain as Johann leaned against his tree. "Oh, that was kind of close," Michael breathed. "Nah, I had you. I wonder how far we have to climb." Michael looked up, but he couldn't see where they might be able to get off the sheer plain that rose with hardly a slant. Johann looked to his left. "Look there. That looks like the path to me, and it's a gradual climb." He looked at Michael. "Much safer than going straight up." Michael nodded. "Let's try it." The path zigzagged back and forth up the mountainside. At times it became steep enough that the boys had to crawl on hands and knees, but then it would level out. Johann was tired, hungry, and thirsty beyond anything he had ever experienced. He didn't think he could go on. He glanced up at the sky, expecting the discouraging rains to begin pounding him any second. But the sun continued to pour its relentless heat upon him. "Michael, you still behind me?" he called back. Michael panted. "Oh, I'm here. I just don't think I can take another step is all." "Come on, Michael. You can do it. We just have a little ways yet. I can see the top now." He lied. "But we're almost there." As Johann called his encouraging words to his friend, he began to feel a little bit of strength and started to believe the words he spoke. "Well, you boys made pretty good time after all." Johann recognized Medwin's familiar deep belly laugh. He lifted his chin and beheld Medwin's broad grin before his weary eyes blurred. Johann strained to reach a handhold and grabbed Medwin's boot. The man bent down and jerked him up by his arm as quickly as picking up a blanket and setting him on his feet. He laughed again and clamped his large hands on Johann's shoulders. "Good to see you, boy." Michael's dark hair appeared rising over the edge beside their feet, his hand groping the dirt for a handhold. Medwin looked down and jumped a little. "Oh, excuse me, boy." He reached down and brought up Michael, who fairly flew through the air until he landed on his feet beside Johann. Medwin released his strong grip on Michael's arm and patted the boy's cheek. "Well, how you boys fared?" The confused and exhausted boys fumbled to respond. "Good? Yeah, good. Fine. We're just on our way to... Where are we going?" "Yeah, a stone. Some stone. Do you have any food?" Edwin grinned and his eyes sparkled with amusement. "Oh, I got that and then some. Come on, boys." He stepped into the woods and the boys took off their packs and dragged them behind as they followed. Chapter 21. An Attack. After a few yards, they emerged from the wood onto a clear, open path. Good Master stood there waiting for them. "Oh, look what I done found," Medwin hollered. "They's beat as dirty rugs and smell twice as bad, but they made it this far." Good Master smiled approvingly and turned into the trees. They all followed him through a familiar wooded area that opened onto a clearing. Before them was the same wonderful oasis where Good Master had given them their little swords. It seemed like a lifetime since Johann had seen this place. Good Master and Medwin each took a backpack from the exhausted boys and crossed the stone bridge to the other side of the stream. Johann had been through so much since he first stepped onto those large stones to cross the stream. He was back where he started, with no treasure in sight. Ugh! But he couldn't think about that now. He smelled something cooking and saw the large flat stone under the tree once again laden with food. "Oh, you better wash up in the stream," Medwin advised. The boys rinsed off as much dirt as they could. They presented themselves at the table with clean hands and almost clean faces. They ate and drank and laughed as they excitedly retold their exploits with the tree soldiers and the giant creature birds. Michael told about the seed of doubt that was planted in Johann's ear. Goodmaster looked hard at Johann. "Did you get all of it out?" Johann's cheeks flushed crimson. "Yes, all of it." Goodmaster smiled. "Well, that's good. Very good." "We didn't make it to the stone, sir," Johann said, and he pulled out his sword. "They're still dull. We haven't been able to sharpen them." "Well, you made it to the stone just fine," Goodmaster said, and took the weapon from the boy's hand. He began to slide the blade back and forth on the stone table with deliberate, short strokes. Sparks flew from the blade. Medwin looked at Michael and extended his palm to him. "May I?" he asked, and Michael unsheathed his weapon and handed it to the man. Soon little sparks were flying on both sides of the table as the men silently sharpened the swords. After a few minutes, Goodmaster said, "That should do it," and gave Johann his sword. Medwin tested his blade with a callous thumb. "Oh, yeah, that's good." He held the blade and presented the handle to Michael. "Your weapon, sir," he said with exaggerated dignity. The boys laughed as Michael took it and slid it into its sheath. "So, this is the stone of suffering?" "Well, it's a stone, and you suffered to get to it, didn't you?" Medwin winked. The boys laughed. "I think you boys best get to that pond over yonder before the sun sets and see if you can't get good and clean. This journey ain't over, you know." While the boys laughed and swam in the pond, the men set up their bedrolls. "You think they are ready?" Medwin asked Goodmaster in a hushed and serious tone. "I think so." The sun was setting, and Medwin made a campfire that warmed the cool night air around them. The boys were well fed and washed. They sat on their bedrolls around the fire, trying to stay awake while Medwin told one of his stories. "And that's why the hummingbird can fly backwards." He looked at the boys. Johann's sleeping head lay against a boulder, spittle beginning to drip from the corner of his mouth. Michael sat cross-legged with his head held up by his two fists propped against his cheeks, but he was sound asleep as well. The men laughed and nudged the boys. "Time to turn in, boys." They needed no further instruction. Each crawled under his blanket. Medwin put another log on the fire. I'll take first watch." He leaned against a boulder and picked up a thick, straight stick, withdrawing a knife from the sheath. At his belt, he began whittling. In the morning, when the boys awoke, they were alone, but food was set over the fire. Johann felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasted no time finishing his breakfast and repacked his pack, being careful to roll his bedroll correctly. Michael ate and repacked his belongings as well. When they were ready, they looked up and saw Goodmaster at the edge of the path. They waved, and he met the boys on the path. "You'll need much strength for this day, my son." Johann flinched at the expression. "Come, I've prepared something for you." The man turned and headed up the small path, and the boys followed. A few yards up, they began to wind around boulders to climb up a rocky path. Johann slipped often, sending a spray of rocks and pebbles tumbling down after him. The ground filled his nostrils with clouds of dust. Soon they came to the mouth of a cave. Beside it, a large flat stone that held flat, round bread with a large flask and 3 plain wooden goblets. The boys dropped their packs and sat down on the dusty ground. Good master sat on a boulder, lifted the bread, broke it, and gave a piece to each of the boys. Then he filled the goblets and passed them around. The boys ate the bread and drank in silence. The sweet liquid warmed Johann's throat. Good master stood. The boys rose slowly, Johann painfully aware of a foreboding that pressed on his chest, clutched his little sword. Despite the respite of the night before, he suddenly felt weary from the foreboding. "Don't you have anything else for us?" Johann asked, touching the tiny weapon. "This little sword, it's awfully small." Good master only smiled and embraced Michael for a moment. Then he turned and embraced Johann. In that moment, Johann felt a surge of new strength spread through him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling new confidence. When he opened his eyes again, good master was gone, but in his hand, Johann held a lantern. The boys easily lifted their packs to their shoulders, turned to face the dark hole, and stepped into the cave. They walked into a tunnel which made a gradual winding descent into the heart of the mountain. The low roof caused the boys to stoop slightly to avoid scraping their heads. Johann held up the lantern with the anticipation of finding the treasure at any moment. He found it difficult to walk slowly and carefully. Thin fingers of rock appeared on the cave floor, causing him to stumble often. Despite his eagerness, Johann was forced to slow down and carefully watch the floor at his feet. He whispered warnings about the path to Michael, who was close at his heels, as though they were creeping into enemy territory. "Watch that rock! There's a step down there." Presently, the tunnel opened to a great cavern. Huge icicles of white rock hung from the ceiling, shining with a wetness that seeped down the cone-shaped formations. All around the cavern, the echo of heavy droplets could be heard hitting a pool of luminescent water below. White pillars grew out of the floor as well, reaching up to the fingers that hung from the ceiling. The boys stood motionless, taking in the sight and sounds. The steady drips of water made a chorus of plunks that sang through the empty chamber like a dismal concert. The chamber glowed with a blue light that seemed to shine from deep within the clear pool below. The boys could see more white fingers growing in the pool. They reminded Johann of Widow McCrae's knobby arithmetic fingers. Johann felt a pull in his heart and wondered what she would be doing now. As he gazed into the pool below, her hand came out of the water, followed by her haggard and weary face. She looked up at him and cried, "Help me!" Her pitiful, scratchy voice echoed from the pillars, then faded away. Johann gasped, jumping back. Michael grabbed him. "What's wrong?" "Did you see that?" Johann asked desperately. "Did you hear her?" "See what? Hear who? Nobody here but us, Johann. Why, you don't look so good. Maybe you should sit down." No, I'm okay," Johann replied. He breathed deeply and shook his head. The boys continued picking their way around the rock formations. Reaching the small pool, they drank deeply, quenching their thirst and saving the water in their flagons. As they drank, a darkness rippled slowly through the water. Johann, bent close to the pool, didn't see the long, undulating shadow in the water moving toward him. He was splashing his face with water just as the creature emerged and reared a dark head with blazing green eyes above him. It opened its great mouth as Johann stood frozen, staring at large fangs. Michael ran and plowed into his friend, knocking him out of the way just as the fangs snapped the air, missing Johann's head and sending a spray of water all over the boys. They both scrambled across the ground away from the creature. Its deafening roar echoed around the chamber. As suddenly as it had appeared, the darkness vanished into the water, leaving the boys trembling and damp on the cavern floor. "What was that?" Johann stammered. "I don't know, but it may come back. Come on." Michael fumbled with the little sheath at his side, pulling out the thin sword. The water of the pool began to ripple, then exploded as the great Leviathan rose above them again with an even greater roar. Johann grabbed his ears, but Michael stood poised with his little sword ready for battle. The creature waved his great head from side to side. Two long horns grew out from behind its eyes and twisted into sharp points. If it lowered its head, it might easily impale the boys. Its great mouth closed, but large fangs still hung from the sides of it. Two smaller horns grew from the end of its long snout. They could see no arms or legs in its snake-like body. Michael lunged at the air with his sword and yelled back at the creature, "Ah!" Johann grabbed his sword and mirrored his friend's actions, wondering what possible threat they could pose to this monster. The creature curved its back. A frill of large pointed scales stood up along its spine, and it began to lower its head. A massive scaled claw reached out of the water, followed by another. The creature continued moving toward them on short, thick legs like a great centipede. The boys both lunged toward the monster with their swords outstretched. The tips of their blades each pierced the creature's neck about the same time. An explosion of golden sparks filled the cavern and rained down on the boys. They covered their heads and fell to their knees. As the last sparks hit the ground and disappeared, the boys slowly stood. The creature roared and advanced, but slowly. Michael ran and jabbed at the neck again and pulled his blade downward. The creature shrieked, and something that looked like hot lava oozed from the wound. When the creature retreated and disappeared into the pool, smoky steam hissed and rose from the water. Without a word, the boys turned and ran. Michael scrabbled over some low boulders that scattered the cave floor as Johann came bounding through the air and leaped over the rocks and Michael's head. Although Johann cleared Michael's head, the lantern he carried didn't. They hunched down behind the boulders. Michael rubbed the whelp forming on the side of his head. Then they inched up to peer over the boulder. The water still churned with slight waves, but there was no sign of the creature. The boys waited a long while until the water of the pool was again like glass. "Well, where to?" Michael asked. Johann raised his lantern and looked at the shelf beyond the pool. It rose up from an incline on the right to a raised platform. He could see an arch with a hallway in the cave wall to the left where the platform ended. "Let's go up there," he said, pointing to the archway. They clutched their swords tightly as they slipped over the boulders. The boys crept quietly around the pool, keeping as far from its edge as they could, until they reached the platform behind it. Once up on the platform, Johann whispered, "I don't think that thing can reach us from here." Michael nodded in agreement. Still, they held their swords out. Johann looked back at the blue pool. It was now tranquil, reflecting the beauty of the cavern and its glossy surface. He turned and looked at Michael. Michael's face turned slightly ashen, except for the red bump on the side, and the sword in his outstretched hand began to tremble. Johann spun back around and looked up into the angry green eyes. The creature had returned, and now its head was raised above them. Johann bent down and lunged, thrusting his sword, but before his blade could reach into its long neck, the creature chomped down on Johann's pack and flung him up. Johann somersaulted onto the creature's back and thrust his blade deep into its neck. Michael also slashed at the neck with his sword. The creature writhed in agony and wagged its head. Michael dodged its sharp horns and pressed his attack, hacking at its neck until it gushed hot, crimson blood. Johann, holding his sword downward with both hands, stabbed his blade repeatedly into its back. The creature gave an anguished howl, and its massive head wagged toward Michael, then away. Johann jumped off and onto the ledge, but seeing the tip of the creature's horn falling toward him, rolled out of the way. The creature's head hit the rock ledge, and it fell back into the pool. The blue water darkened as its blood poured out. The boys ran away and stopped before the archway, looking at the dark hallway of stone that stretched and disappeared around a corner. They took a few steps into the hallway and stopped. Without a word, both boys, as if on signal, dropped their packs and sat down. Michael poured water from his flagon onto his sword to clean it, and offered the same to Johann. With their swords once again secure in their belts, Johann reflected on the danger he had put Michael in with his journey. Michael knew firsthand about this treacherous mountain and had joined him willingly. Why would he do that? Johann spoke first. What was it like to be here with your dad? Difficult, Michael replied. Johann waited to hear his story, but Michael remained silent. Finally, Michael took a deep breath and said, We fought practically the whole way. He looked back over his shoulder at the pool and jerked his chin toward the monster floating motionless in the pool. And not like that. We fought with each other. Father kept telling me which way to go and wouldn't let me think for myself. I wasn't interested in the treasure to begin with, but he said I needed to look for it. Finally, I took off on a path by myself. That's when I found the good master. He saved my life, actually. Gave me the whistle. And, well, we met back up with my father, and we returned home. So, are you interested in the treasure now? Johann asked warily. Well, I'd like to see you get it, Michael said with a grin. Chapter 22. Deep in the Cave. The two adventurers stood and repositioned their packs, staring at the rocky hallway before them. Johann picked up the lantern and looked at Michael, who nodded a, "Let's go." He stepped cautiously toward the archway. The narrow hallway wound through switchback turns, all the while making a continual descent. Johann felt his way with his free hand on the wet wall, a slight dizziness beginning in his head. Michael kept his hands on the wet walls as well. Johann's ears began to crackle when he swallowed, as if his head was stuffed with dry leaves as they continued their descent. The boys plodded ahead in silence till neither could tolerate the monotony any longer. Michael, please tell me this goes somewhere. It has to. I didn't see any other way out of the cavern, did you? Johann didn't want to admit that he hadn't thought of looking for another way. Doubt began to embrace him like cold, wet arms. Fear gave the arms strength. Do you think we should turn back? No, there's an end to everything, Michael said, quoting his father. He began telling Johann more about the journey he had made with his dad. Johann imagined the scene as Michael told his story. The father and son had been walking in a downpour of the discouraging rains until Michael felt he must give up before he lost his mind. "Son," his father had said, "this is going to end. There's an end to everything. The question is, when does it end? Or when it does end, do you want to still be here on the path where we started, or further down the road?" I wanted to be off the path completely, but I kept going because of Father's constant prodding. Michael sighed and fell silent for a bit. I remember being on top of the mountain. I had stormed off from Father's continuous instruction. "Do it this way, don't go there. Didn't I tell you?" Before I knew it, I was perched on top of a high peak alone. I lay face down, scared, trembling, and sobbing. That's where I met the good master. Michael continued to explain. With no one else to turn to, he had looked into those eyes and found safety. Good master. It was here that Michael hesitated in his story, as if there was something he didn't want to tell. Well, anyway, he helped me find my father. But, you know, Father was somehow different after that. His instructions became clear and helpful, and his advice wise. I don't know what had changed him. To alleviate the tedium of the winding passage, Michael began to talk of their friends back in the village. Johann found himself thinking about, even yearning for, the treasure. He felt a desire growing within him that had not been there before, and he paid no attention as Michael droned on about the people. Suddenly, Johann cared nothing for them. They all went about their little lives, content in their little village, when there was a powerful treasure to be found right in this mountain. He would finally be rich. New ideas began to materialize in his imagination. With riches, he could buy whatever he wanted and never work for Mr. Whitaker. With the treasure, he would have comfort and ease. With the power, he would command respect. No longer would the villagers refer to him as that boy. He would be Johann Falsworth, respected and admired. Michael's bantering popped his dream bubble, and his thoughts of wealth vanished. And then he looked up and said, "I thought you were the pig." Michael roared with laughter. He shook his head, laughing, and sighed. Johann looked back at him and rolled his eyes slightly. Michael laughed till there were tears in his eyes. "That was so funny." Johann shrugged. Michael reached out and grabbed the lantern from Johann's grasp and held it up till he could see Johann's face clearly. Johann's eyes looked like marbles reflecting the darkness of the cave. "Oh, what's wrong with your eyes?" Michael asked. Johann jerked the lantern from his grasp and continued through the passage. Michael took a deep breath and sighed loudly. He stopped walking and stood watching his friend continue down the tunnel. Johann usually laughed easily, though never very much, unless it was at someone else's embarrassment. Michael remembered something his dad once told him. Some people just want the treasure for what it can do for them. Be careful of these, Michael. You'll know them when they laugh because somehow they never really let out their laughter. And if they cry, it's as if they still have buckets left inside them. They're not safe, Michael. These people are just not safe. Michael had not understood his father's words until now, as he looked at his friend. How could Johann not even take pleasure in the humorous, simple blunders of their everyday lives? As he watched his friend trudge along, his shoulders bent under his load, he realized it was not Johann's pack that weighed him down, but his melancholy. Still, he couldn't see what could be unsafe about him. Michael grasped the whistle in his shirt and thought, "Good master, I wish you'd hurry." Then he ran to catch up with his friend. Their footsteps made a steady rhythm as they shuffled through the cavern hallway. Another sound began to join this rhythm, faint and intermediate. As it grew louder, Johann stopped abruptly. Listen! The sound echoed through the passageway. As the boys proceeded, it grew louder. They rounded one more switchback turn and stood in front of a large, dark cavern. Dim lights from oil lamps were strewn about. The noise came from small shadows that moved around the room. Johann turned down the flame in his lantern. The boys listened and crouched, motionless, as their eyes grew accustomed to the dark. It was then that Johann noticed the wall of the cavern was alive with faint sparkles. His heartbeat quickened and his breath caught in his throat as he gazed on his treasure. Michael gasped. The little shadows moving and murmuring about the cavern were willbenders, a whole nest of them. He pulled Johann back into the passageway, whispering in his ear, Willbenders, nasty ones. Apparently they can see in the dark. We need a plan. I got a plan, Johann replied, emptying his pack. I plan to fill this with the treasure. Didn't you see it? Johann, his dark eyes shining, looked eagerly at Michael as he crawled to the entryway again, studying the dimly lit cavern. To the right, in the far wall of the space, he could barely make out another passage. He examined the room carefully this time. It was the only exit. The hairy little willbenders tottered around, up and down makeshift ladders. Oh, they were scraping at the treasure with crude and seemingly useless tools. Nonetheless, little piles of gleaming gems littered the cavern floor. One such pile was not 3 feet from the boys, with no willbender close by. Johann crawled to it and stealthily put the stones in his pack. Michael now picked up the darkened lantern and followed his friend. There were a dozen crude wooden ladders leaning against the rock wall around the cavern. Beside each lantern, a creature held on to a rope. Johann studied their industry. The rope went up and over the top rung of the ladder and down the other side. The other end of the rope was tied to the handle of a wooden bucket. The creature holding the rope would yank on this simple pulley system, raising the bucket to the creature who mined the gems at the top of the ladder. This one would toss a sparkling gem into the bucket. When the bucket contained a handful of gems, the creature on the cave floor would let out the rope, bringing the bucket down where he would empty it onto a pile beside his feet. Then he would hoist the bucket back up to his partner. While the partner mined more gems, the creature anchored the rope so he could fill another bucket with gems from the pile and waddle to and fro, transporting the gems to other piles. No one seemed to be taking the treasure out of the cavern. Johann noticed a long rope coiled beside them and had an idea. He motioned Michael to stay and be quiet. He waited until the creature stationed at the closest ladder to them ran off to deliver a bucket of gems. Moving with the stealth and industry of a cat on the prowl, Johann took one end of the rope and tied it to the bottom rung of this ladder and put some gems in his pack. He motioned for Michael to follow him. The boys moved like shadows down the dark cave wall. Johann waited until the next ladder was abandoned and wrapped the rope round the bottom rung before taking some more gems. They continued in this manner until they had wound the rope round every ladder they passed. They were nearing the end of the rope, and Johann's pack bulged with his treasure. He tied the leather straps to close his pack. His legs began to cramp as he bent down in the shadows. Glancing cautiously round the room, he slid his arms through the shoulder straps of his pack and hauled the heavy burden to his shoulders. The weight was more than he expected. He fastened the front belt securely just as a little creature appeared in front of him. His back was to the boys. The boys held their breath, watching as the little figure busied himself with a pile of gems. Johann could see a loop on the creature's breeches that probably held his makeshift pick when he wasn't using it. Johann slowly reached the end of his rope up to this loop. He carefully threaded the rope through the loop and tied the end back onto the rope, thus securing it to the little creature. Johann pressed his hands against the cave floor to raise himself. Another Willbender walked up behind the first creature and stepped on Johann's hand as it looked curiously at the rope tied to his co-worker's breeches. Before a sound could come from the Willbender, Michael drew his sword and, rising to his knees, thrust it into the creature's back. Immediately, the creature vanished into gray smoke, and Michael almost toppled over with the momentum that met no resistance. Johann pulled him back. They looked at the little sword in astonishment for a few seconds, then stood to begin their escape. They bent over and tiptoed the remaining feet to the exit. Johann's pack, full of sparkling gems, wrenched his shoulders. They were about to reach the passage when they heard a gruff cry from the sabotage creature. "They're taking our treasure!" Michael fumbled to turn up the flame in the lantern as Johann struggled to stand erect with his heavy pack. The creature ran after them, reaching for Johann's pack, but the rope tied to his breeches went taut. He ran in place for a few seconds with his arms outstretched. He turned to see the rope attached to him and gave it a good hard yank to release the tension and resume his pursuit. Cries of anguish and crashing sounds echoed around the sparkling walls and as ladders and buckets toppled all around. Johann grinned at Michael and they turned to escape. The boys took off running, bouncing off the rock walls as they rounded the sharp turns of the switchbacks. All the while they heard the sound of stamping feet and angry voices gaining on them. Johann drew his sword as one of the Willbenders scurried closer. Unlike Milligrub, this creature had glowing red eyes and bared long, menacing fangs. As he leapt toward Johann, reaching out with talon-like hands, Johann thrust his little sword at him, expecting the creature to vanish as the one before. Instead, the sword pierced its shoulder and it fell, wounded on the ground. The boys continued to run. At last, they saw a natural light in the passageway. They rounded a corner and saw an opening of blue sky framed by dark green leaves. Speeding to their escape, Michael tumbled out first, the lantern rolling ahead of him. Johann jumped toward the opening just as another Willbender tried to grab his foot. Johann looked back in time to see Johann fly out of the mountainside and land on his stomach, his heavy pack of stones nearly knocking him unconscious. The Willbenders cringed in the bright light and scurried back to their dark cavern. Slowly, Johann stood rubbing the growing knot on the back of his head. "Ah, that hurt," he grimaced. Looking round, both boys began to feel disoriented. Despite their long descent into the mountain, they were now standing quite close to the top. The peak of the mountain rose behind them. They gazed up at about 30 feet of massive gray rock that stood out of the trees. The boys stood on level ground. A dense forest of pine trees dropped off the side to their left. A gradual rocky slope lay before them with dense forest to their right. Johann paced impatiently from one side to the other. "I don't see a path, Michael. Do you see a path?" Michael started ahead, then stopped. He turned back and looked up at the mountain. Johann continued walking the perimeter of their little plain, unable to find any remnant of a path. "What do we do?" Michael asked. "I don't know." Michael fumbled toward one slope and then the other. One slope offered a gradual descent into a dark and dense forest. Another gave them a steep descent into equally dark trees. The only slope that was in the open offered dangerous rocky cliffs. Michael walked toward the steep slope. We should go this way. He stopped abruptly. No, that's not right. He turned back toward the gradual slope. No, this one's better. We should go this way. But then again, that other one might work. Pondering one way then another, he stood at a small pile of oddly shaped rocks and sticks. When he turned, his foot caught at the bottom of it, sending the rocks and sticks tumbling with a hollow echoing at the sound of his feet. Michael looked down at dry bones, just as Johann said, "Would you just go?" Michael took off down the rocky slope with such speed that Johann scarcely could keep up with his new burden jostling on his back. He tried to reposition his pack, but the slightest movement would send him swinging off balance. Even so, he sped on toward Michael. Every few steps, Johann would hop on one foot, waving his arms for balance, then continue running only to get off balance again. "Michael, wait! Slow down!" Finally, the boys slowed, and Johann caught up to him breathless. He shifted the weight on his back and found himself slowly falling to one side, his other leg and arm raised in a comical balancing act. Johann reached out and pushed his friend to right. "Oh, thanks. What happened?" "I realized we were on a plane of hesitation when I saw the bones, and I knew I had to do something or we would be stuck there just hesitating." Father told stories about the planes of hesitation. Mimicking his father's deep voice, he quoted, "A person's inability to decide would make him stick in a quagmire of indifference, and before anyone knew, there was nothing left but the bones of his indecisiveness." "Oh," Johann looked blankly at Michael. "Oh, what's a quagmire?" "I don't know. Something really bad, though. Did you see those bones?" "Well, I'm ready to go home now," Johann announced. "I've got what I came for, and I don't need to willy-nilly around. I just need to get down off this blasted mountain." Johann began traversing the slope, his arms teetering in the air to balance himself as small rocks and sand slipped under his feet. Michael sighed. He shook his head slowly as he cautiously followed. As he picked his way among the rocks, Michael slipped and fell forward, sliding down the mountainside on his belly toward Johann. A large boulder arrested his plunge, and as he stood wiping blood from his scraped hands and forearms, he watched the back of his friend continue down the mountain. Chapter 23. Johann's Treasure. The two boys picked their way around rocks and boulders for the better part of an hour. The sun was high and hot. Perspiration ran down their faces and backs. Had there been a breeze, it would have cooled their wet faces, but there was no breath of air. Finally, Johann turned around to Michael to suggest they take a break. "I need some water," he said. He pulled up his flagon, but only a drop of water fell from the bottom as he held it up. He stuck his fingers in a big hole at the seam. "Oh, I guess it popped when I was bouncing off the cave wall." Michael leaned against a large boulder and unhooked the leather flagon at his belt. He uncorked it and took a deep draught before handing it to Johann. The water, now warm, did not quench his thirst, but it did soothe his dry throat. When Johann grasped the bottle, he noticed the scrapes on Michael's arms. "What happened to you?" "I fell back at the top when we were heading down," Michael explained. "Were you okay? Why didn't you say something?" He took long swigs of warm water and spit out the last mouthful in disgust. Michael shrugged his shoulders. "That's no big deal. So now that you've found the treasure, what are you going to do with it?" Johann grinned and his eyes darkened. "First, I'll get a nice house. I might even move to the town in the valley. I'm going to have plenty to eat, clothes to wear." "I thought you just wanted to get out of a little bit of work," Michael said. "Now you want clothes? A house? Well, I'll never have to worry about working for Mr. Whitaker again." Michael shook his head and stood, ready to resume the long journey home. "Well, I'll give some to you, of course, and Widow McCrae. And Johann continued, searching for more ideas. I'll get someone to fix Mrs. Mackenzie's gate. Ha ha, how's that? Sounds great, Michael called back without enthusiasm. There's the path. Michael pointed to a gravel path that wound round large, jagged rocks and boulders. Johann watched Michael, wondering what he had said wrong. Michael had been his friend ever since he could remember. The two had run many miles through the village as young boys, pursuing the villains and monsters of their imaginations. Wearing makeshift armor and wooden bowls for helmets, they had captured giants and rescued damsels, all the while fighting right and wrong and defending the townspeople from unspeakable plights that only young boys can conjure. Not everyone appreciated when they had been narrowly rescued from horrific perils because windows were usually cracked in the battles. Barrels of goods were known to topple during some of their most daring escapades, and evil merchants would bellow menacing threats down the street after them. But that was before the curtain had been so abruptly drawn over Johann's childhood. Carefree innocence was replaced by endless chores and a deep, hollow ache that would not be soothed. It was Michael's dad who taught him how to build things, mend things, and generally take care of Widow McCrae's garden. What about the power? What will you do with the power? The voice was not Michael's. It seemed to be in his head and on the mountain at once. Did you hear that? Michael looked up. The path now hugged the mountainside. Michael was maneuvering his way around a large boulder. Hear what? Johann shrugged. Nothing, I guess. He hoisted his sagging load higher on his shoulders. The weight grew steadily more burdensome. It was supposed to give him some kind of power, but so far its heaviness had only drained his strength. In the short distance ahead, the rocky slope disappeared around the mountain. Luckily, boulders on their left formed a kind of low wall, or at least a protection from immediately sliding off the mountain. The boys had no choice but to go this direction. They picked their way through the boulder embankment. Where it converged with the rock wall on their right, the path narrowed and the descent became steeper. It was covered with gravel, and before they knew it, they were sliding down a short gravel slope like a funnel that emptied into a wider level path, shaded by large cypress trees. Michael landed first in a sitting position, his knees drawn up before him and his hands propping him up at his sides. He was looking around trying to get his bearings when he heard Johann's long wail behind him. Look out! Michael rolled to the right, but he wasn't quick enough. Johann landed face down on Michael's back with his bulky knapsack of precious stones. They were now stacked and pinned down by the infernal knapsack, Johann's foot by Michael's ear. As Johann struggled, the weight shifted in the knapsack, pulling him off of Michael and onto his back. He now struggled against the ponderous pack, his arms and legs circling in the air. Michael stood up. You look like a beetle on its back. That stupid treasure is going to kill us both, you know. Johann continued to struggle. What kind of power was he supposed to have? He couldn't even get up. Michael surveyed the path, which split again into a large Y shape. To the left, the path continued its descent, a shaded descent, but the struggling beetle blocked this way. Michael reached down and helped Johann to his feet. You could at least empty some of it, Michael said, opening the flap. No! The anger surprised them both. Don't touch it! Before Michael let the flap drop, he looked at Johann's treasure. His knapsack was filled with rocks. Ordinary gray rocks. Not a gem among them. Ah, Johann, I think you should see this. He pulled out one of the rocks and handed it to Johann, whose eerie black eyes glistened. Have you ever seen anything so incredible? He asked. Johann, it's a rock. How can you say that? That emerald alone could buy me a house. Look at how it glimmers. Johann turned the rock and laughed. It's making green waves on your face. Put it back. And he handed the rock to Michael, who put it back and carelessly retied the pack's leather straps. They proceeded down the path, an awkward silence between them. And after they disappeared around a bend, Goodmaster came walking down the path behind him. He strolled leisurely, grinning in the warm sunlight. The trees that had shaded and cooled their path were sparse now. The path hugged every curve of the mountain wall. Now and then a tree jutted out the side of the mountain just below their feet. Nothing offered shade to their path. Finally, the mountain fell away on their left in a sheer and abrupt wall of granite, as if someone had excavated a huge chunk out of the side with a giant flat shovel. Although the path was still wide enough to walk side by side, each boy stayed close to the wall of rock beside them, as far from the edge as they could. Johann's hands began to sweat as he gazed at the incredibly sheer drop just a few feet away. About 30 yards ahead, the path resumed the normal slope of the mountain. Once on that part of the path, they could fall off and just roll into a tree. If they fell there, they would fall thousands of feet straight down. Johann felt the weight of his pack pulling at him. He dare not adjust it now. If it sent him off balance here. He fixed his eyes on the back of Michael's head, focusing on the dark hair that was tangled and sticking out in wild tufts. Just ahead, a dead tree stuck out of the side of the mountain below the path like a gnarled hand. Johann sensed something or someone above them. He stopped and looked up. He thought he glimpsed something hairy moving in the rocks above, but as he stared, he could see nothing but rocks. Michael, wait a minute. Michael stopped and turned his head slowly to look over his shoulder at Johann. What is it? Michael whispered. I think someone's watching us up there. Michael looked up. I don't see anything, he said and walked forward. Suddenly, a small boulder tumbled down from above, splitting in two as it hit the path in front of them. Jagged pieces bounced and hurled into the abyss on their left. Michael, trying to dodge the biggest piece, moved to his left, but a rock from above hit him in the shoulder and sent him over the edge. Michael! Johann cried as he dove toward his friend, just managing to clasp his arm before he dropped completely out of sight. Michael held tightly to Johann's wrist with both hands and swung one leg over to the knobby branch of the dead tree. But as he pressed his foot against it, the dead, brittle wood cracked and heaved. Meanwhile, Johann was again pinned by his burden. He lay on his stomach with his head just over the edge, holding on to Michael with both hands. His pack with its heavy stones had shifted up against the back of his head, pinning him helplessly with its weight. He tried to pull Michael, but nothing happened. The more Michael pressed on the branch, the more it cracked. It would not hold his weight. There was no way Johann could wriggle out of his burden without letting go of Michael. If he could just empty his pack. If he opened the flap, though, all his treasure would pour into the abyss below and be lost forever. He squeezed Michael's wrist again and pulled with all his strength. Nothing happened. Where was his power? To keep his treasure, he would have to let go of his friend. Johann shut his eyes against thoughts of what his newfound wealth could bring. His palms were sweating and Michael's wrist slipped. In a moment, the realization of what would happen to Michael if he did not act quickly cleared Johann's friend. He would not lose his friend. Johann grabbed for his little sword with his right hand. He reached behind him with the blade. It was just long enough. With a few awkward jabs, the blade finally caught beneath one leather strap. Johann yanked the blade up. The leather broke, and one corner of the flap opened. The gems poured out of the pack and spilled silently into the chasm below, bouncing off Michael's head as they went. Now freed from his burden, Johann dropped his sword and scrambled to his knees, pulling Michael up with all his strength. Michael gave one last push on the dead branch, which collapsed completely under the pressure, but it gave Michael enough thrust to be pulled back onto the path. Both boys fell back against the granite wall on the path, the sun shining blindingly in their eyes. Then a figure stood over them, blocking the sun. "Well done, Johann. You chose well," good master said. Chapter 24. The War. Good master pulled the boys to their feet. "You must hurry now, for your enemy waits you like a roaring lion," he said. "First you must get off this ridge." He urged them to the protected path. They hurried into the forested path where the mountain resumed its gradual descent with no dangerous cliffs. Once under the canopy of a tree, good master walked to a small stone table. He moved the top stone, revealing a sepulchre inside. He pulled out 2 breastplates. "Put these on," he ordered. He held heavy leather straps that dangled bronze plates. The boys slipped on the armor. Bronze plates covered their chests and backs, secured at the shoulders with thick leather straps. They tied the side straps. Good master handed them a pair of leather sandals. Johann looked at his own worn boots, the soles barely held together now by threads. He gladly changed. Finally, good master handed them each a bronze helmet. It was not stately or handsome, but rather small and round like a bull with leather straps. Johann looked at Michael with his bull strapped securely under his chin. "Do I look as stupid as he does?" he asked good master. The man smiled and chunked a good-sized rock at Johann's head, but Johann felt nothing. "This is for your salvation in battle," good master explained. Excitement began to grow in the boys. They didn't know what lay ahead, but somehow they felt they had prepared for it their whole lives already. "You lack one thing, your shield." Good master reached far into the chest and pulled out 2 leather bracelets. "Give me your arm, Johann." Johann held out his arm, and the man tied the bracelet to his wrist. It had a small metal shield that covered his wrist and only part of his hand. "Thanks, this will protect my wrist." Johann tried in vain to make the corners of his mouth pull into a thankful smile. "It will quench the fiery darts," good master assured him as he tied the bracelet onto Michael's wrist. "Have your swords ready," good master warned. "You are not far from home. Do not stray to the right or to the left. Trust the treasure that is now in you." He looked straight at Johann. "But I lost the treasure." Even as he said the words, Johann felt something give way deep inside of him, much like the avalanche of gems he watched emptying out of his pack. Tears welled up in his eyes. Good master held him close, and Johann buried his face in the rough folds of the man's robe. Before he knew it, a flood of grief and anger washed out of him as he cried. Michael looked on, smiling. Then, as suddenly as the flood had started, it stopped. Johann looked into the man's penetrating eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Joy flooded through his veins, and he felt strength and purpose. Good master released him and nodded. "Now go. Abernathy's Sullivan will stop at nothing to keep you from leaving this mountain with my treasure." The boys turned and hurried down the path. In a few yards, it opened to a great field, and they could see the base of the mountain and their village far on the other side of the field. The sun was low in the sky. Coming down the slopes ahead of them was a small army of willbenders. Johann could see Abernathy Sullivan perched on a granite ledge high above them, shouting orders. "Stop them! Don't let them get away!" he cried. As the little creatures ran toward the boys, Michael swiped across the breasts of three at once with his sword. They disappeared, looking what looked like fireflies twinkling in their place. Surprised but encouraged, Michael continued his pursuit with outstretched sword. Johann braced himself, not sure if he could be as effective. He gripped his sword and jabbed at the first creature to approach him. It fell motionless on the ground. Abernathy Sullivan laughed from his perch above Johann. "Boy, you don't have any power. You're useless." As he spoke, he hurled a small ball of fire at Johann's head. Johann lifted his left arm to cover his head, and the small shield on his wrist enlarged and formed a complete covering that deflected the fiery dart back up at Sullivan. When he reached his arm down in front of him, the shield was again the size of a small trinket on the leather band. Johann looked at Michael, who was surrounded by fireflies, as he ran confidently into the snarling creature, expertly wielding victory with his little sword and carrying a large shield. Johann watched the creature on the ground at his feet jump up and prepare to attack him again. "Good master gave you nothing," Abernathy cried. "You'll never be worthy of his power." Johann knew Abernathy was right. He began to tremble with fear and doubt. "Johann, forget what is past and press on toward the mark." Good master's voice was clear, although he could not see him. Johann took a deep breath, then thrust his sword again at the menacing creature in front of him, and it flew high into the air, landing at Abernathy's feet on the ledge. Johann ran shouting into the next bunch of little creatures and spun around his sword, making a long swoop, grazing their chests. They disappeared into twinkling lights in the fading sunset. Gaining confidence, Johann joined Michael at his side, deftly defending himself against the onslaught. Every time Johann raised his arm, the shield grew to protect him. A willbender who was barreling toward him with good speed ran headlong into the shield and bounced off like a rubber ball. Johann looked up at the edge. Sullivan was gone. He could only see an emaciated lion. The lion roared once, then turned and disappeared. The boys continued their fight. Standing back to back, they spun around with their swords outstretched, defending against the next wave of willbenders. As sparks faded in the sky, the weary boys saw another wave of creatures moving toward them. "Michael, I can't keep going," Johann declared. "Me neither," agreed Michael. "Oh, you boys don't want to give up now. The fun's just starting." McSwain ran past the boys yelling and swinging a huge sword over his head. When the company of willbenders saw the man hurling toward them, they turned and ran back up the hill like roaches. The boys mustered themselves and ran toward a new company that flanked them. Soon the field was a beautiful scene of sparkling fireflies and spring flowers. The boys were knee-deep in wildflowers, the color reflected in the sunset. McSwain joined them and thrust his sword into the ground. "Now that's a sword!" Johann exclaimed. "Well, boy, you did well with your weapon, but I think you may have a bit more to do." McSwain pointed with his chin over Johann's shoulder. He turned and saw Nelson walking through the field, a Biden's shining bubble enveloping him in the light. On the crest of the hill, good master stood smiling with his hands on his hips. Johann ran toward Nelson, who looked intently at his stone as he walked, unaware of Johann approaching with his sword drawn. Johann thrust his blade through the bubble. This time it disappeared with a loud pop. Nelson looked up at Johann. "Look behind you," Johann said. Nelson turned his gaze to see good master summoning him. Then Nelson looked back at Johann. "It's him," he assured the surprised man. As Nelson began walking toward good master, Michael ran up beside Johann. "What about Judson and Kynard?" he asked. Johann watched good master walking with Nelson, talking and gesturing. "Somehow I think Nelson will help them." Johann turned and raised his sword in a salute to Medwin. Michael stepped up beside him with his sword raised. Medwin saluted back by crossing a fist to his heart and bowing. "You boys best get going now," Medwin advised. "I think you have everything you need." "Come on, Michael, let's go," Johann yelled. The boys ran toward the village, shouting and waving their swords in victory. They came to Michael's house first. The back porch overlooked the field and the mountain beyond. Michael's dad sat in a creaking rocking chair enjoying the evening sunset. The boys ran up to him, breathless and laughing. "Ah, you boys have a good day?" the man asked, sitting up in his chair. "I thought you would be camping tonight." The boys looked at each other incredulously. "Day?" Johann exclaimed to Michael. They still wore the metal helmets, and Michael looked like he had a bowl strapped to his head. Johann pointed and chuckled, then laughed, then roared as he removed his own bowl. The boys laughed and sighed, wiping tears from the corner of their eyes. "Well, you missed supper, but there's some leftovers on the table inside." As the boys walked past him, taking off their breastplates, he gently touched Johann's arm. "Did you find your treasure, son?" he asked intently. Johann looked at Michael's father. The man leaned forward slightly in his chair, and inside his shirt, Johann glimpsed a familiar gold chain. A smile spread across Johann's face, and he felt a pleasant warmth in his heart. "Yeah," he replied. "Yes, I did." All right, last chapter. 25. Justice and Mercy. Widow McCrae walked onto her porch holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She looked up at the ceiling of the porch and yelled, "Johann, you want to take a little break?" "Sure." Johann shinnied down from the roof above, tools dangling from a leather harness around his hips. "It's all fixed now. Shouldn't drop a leak." Ha! He gulped down the lemonade. Suddenly, a grunting and squeaking came up from behind him. "Oh, that pig is out again, Mr. Gowan," the widow cried. "Oh, don't worry, I'll get him," Johann said. He held her old face in his hands and kissed her forehead. "Michael and I will be at Mrs. Mackenzie's fixing her gate before I have to report to Mr. Whitaker this afternoon," he said, and jumped over the porch banister. "Come on, pig," he yelled as he smiled and waved back at the widow. Coming to a gate, he opened it and waited for the pig to waddle into his yard. "Afternoon, Mr. McGowan," he called to the man who was stooped over a plot of dark soil, breaking the hard clumps with his hoe. "Pig got out again." He looked up from his work. "Pig? Oh, get in here. Thank ye, Johann." Rounding the corner of the fence, he came to Michael's yard and hollered for him. Michael appeared on the porch and ran to join him. After repairing Mrs. Mackenzie's gate, they bid her farewell, promising to return soon to build her a new one. "So, Mr. Whitaker has fresh strawberries in," Johann announced. "That's so, huh? And I'm sure a certain Grace Hobbs will be passing by on her way to Mrs. Sutter's quilting bee. Or is it the violin lesson? Or is she going to listen to Willard Tate practice his dumb songs for next week's spring festival?" Johann mused. "Oh, man, come on. We gotta hurry." Michael ran up the main path, dodging shoppers who strolled through the market. Johann loped after him, offering apologies to the ladies and nodding excuse us to the men. Michael slid into position in front of Mr. Whitaker's store and casually leaned against a barrel of hickory nuts. Johann entered the store and greeted Mr. Whitaker, who handed him an apron and a broom. Need you to sweep the porch out front first, then help Luke in the storeroom. Johann stepped onto the store's porch as Grace Hobbs rounded the corner. Michael stood a little taller as he watched her pass. Her long hair was drawn up into a ponytail with a large bow. It was still just yellow hair, same as Johann's, but Johann knew Michael's eyes saw something different. When she noticed Michael, she smiled demurely. Johann scratched his chin and watched his friend, wondering if he had nerve enough to speak. Well, good afternoon, Grace, he croaked. Well, afternoon, Michael, she cooed. How was your camping trip, Johann? Oh, good, real good. The sweaters were good, Johann said. What are you up to, Michael? She asked, then cut her eyes over to Johann and added, or dare I ask? Johann began sweeping, and Michael cleared his throat to speak. Oh, nothing much. We just finished up some chores, fixing things. I fix things, broken things. Did you break them? She asked. What? No, they were already broken, Michael explained. Through no fault of ours, Johann added helpfully and swept dirt off the porch into the dusty street. Well, I'm going to my music lesson. I'm going to sing in the spring festival next week. With Willard Tate? Johann asked, grinning at Michael, who frowned back. No, Miss McKenzie wants me to sing a solo. Michael rolled up like a rooster and, offering his arm, said, Mind if I walk you to your lesson? Well, thank you, Michael. That's real nice. Michael smiled back at Johann and said, I'll see you later. Johann shrugged and entered the store. In the storeroom, Luke instructed him to sweep while he arranged the goods on the shelves. That was some mess you boys made the other day, Luke recollected. Shaking his head, Mr. Whitaker was mad, sure enough. What I don't understand, though, is how you managed it. Well, I didn't, Johann said. It was Willard Tate, but as usual, he gets off scot-free. Always does. I wondered about that, Luke agreed. Seems that boy is always in the shadows when bad stuff happens. You'd think he'd find something better to do, Johann huffed. Well, in case you never noticed, he got nobody to do anything better with. You got Michael. Other kids in town got somebody. Who's he got? Just himself. From what I see, that ain't much. Luke looked hard at Johann. Why are you looking at me? What am I supposed to do about it? Well, maybe you could help the boy somehow. I'd like to help him get caught just for once. Let him get what's coming to him. Johann shook his fist for emphasis. My big papa always said, cream rise to the top, dirt sinks to the bottom. You just keep being the cream, Johann. Johann hung his head and finished sweeping out the storeroom. He spent the rest of the afternoon helping from the alley, far away from customers. He unloaded burlap bags of grain from local farmers and anything else that couldn't be broken or easily destroyed. When Mr. Whitaker finally dismissed him, his arms were so tired that he didn't think he could raise a hand to scratch his head. He started home and noticed Willard Tate ambling down the main road, drawing a line in the dirt with a long stick he dragged behind him. Before he went home, Johann stopped at the meadow and rested against his tree. He gazed at the mountain and pulled the whistle from his shirt, turning it in his fingers. Well, then he blew it. He dropped the chain back into his shirt and sighed. Oh, why so solemn? Good master stepped out from behind the tree. Johann scrambled to his feet. I didn't think, I didn't know if... I'm always with you, Johann. What do you need? Oh, I have a question. The man looked down at the boy. Right, Johann began. Um, it's not fair, I didn't break those jams and widow's eggs. I know. And you didn't put the snake in the strawberry bin. Yeah, so it's not fair, right? You think Willard Tate should be punished? Yes, I do. You think Willard Tate should be punished for not having any friends to keep him out of trouble? Should he be punished for being bored? Or maybe for being jealous of you and Michael? How about for getting me in trouble when it was him who did everything? I've been sweeping and hauling all afternoon while he's been doing absolutely nothing all day. The man put a heavy hand on Johann's shoulder. Maybe you just need to see him differently. Then he turned and walked behind the tree and was gone. Over the next few days, Johann settled into his new routine. His hard work pleased Mr. Whitaker, and he gave him new responsibilities, even allowing him to interact with a few customers. Johann, help Miss Hesse home with her parcels. Mind you come right back, he said one afternoon. Yes, sir, was Johann's eager response. As he stacked the parcels, Willard Tate entered the store, trailing his mother. He reached out his hand toward a shelf, and she slapped his hand like a snake striking its prey. Johann heard the sound of Willard crying, Ow! I told you, don't touch anything! Her shrill words turned Mr. Whitaker's head. Willard walked over to the butcher counter where his father was busy cutting a piece of meat for a customer. Hi, Dad, Willard said quietly. Not now, son, I'm busy, he replied without lifting his head. Johann gathered his parcels and walked out with Miss Hesse. Luckily, she didn't live far or talk much. After he placed the parcels on her kitchen table, she reached into a worn pocketbook and pulled out a coin and offered it to him. Thank you, Johann. Such a fine young man you're becoming, she said as she placed the coin in his hand. He stared at her offering with wide, liquid eyes. Thanks, he said. I'll sure treasure this. He put the coin in his pocket and ran back to the store. He passed Willard carrying many packages and slowly trailing his mother down the main street of town. Willard, hurry up, she snapped while she kept her sharp eyes forward and her even sharper chin lifted. Johann slowed to a walk and grinned at his red-faced nemesis as he passed. Willard glared back with burning eyes. At the store, Johann grabbed the broom and swept the front porch, then busied himself straightening items on the shelves. He helped customers find items and picked items from the lowest shelves for others, so they didn't have to stoop. When he asked Mr. Whitaker if he could arrange the bins on the front porch differently to make it easier for customers to see some items, the man smiled at the boy. Having never seen Mr. Whitaker smile at him, Johann looked at his own feet. Nonetheless, Whitaker thanked him for his good idea and set him to work on the new arrangement. Johann, when you're finished with that, bring some more hickory nuts from the storeroom, Whitaker called out. Yes, sir. Johann began moving the merchandise and saw Willard Tate staring at him from across the street. Johann turned for another item, and when he looked across the street again, Willard was gone. And he finished his work and surveyed it proudly. A customer approaching the door stopped, noticing the merchandise that was now at the front, and picked up a few items to buy. Oh, this looks real good, Johann, Mr. Whitaker praised. I'll go get those nuts now, Johann said. I'll have Luke get 'em. I want to get a few more things from the storeroom myself anyway. You watch the front for me, and I'll be right back. Johann stepped to Mr. Whitaker's counter, his face beaming. Suddenly, a cacophony of muffled shouts and exclamations from the alley sent Johann running to see what had happened. Nothing in Johann's history prepared him for the spectacular sight before his eyes. Willard Tate stood frozen in the alley, the end of a rope in his hand. Mr. Whitaker was shouting epithets that would turn any grown man scarlet. Fortunately, they were hard to understand due to the bucket on his head. Luke was helping to remove it, but the syrup dripping from the bucket and onto Mr. Whitaker and the wood planks of the back porch was making the extraction quite difficult. Johann followed the rope in Willard's hand and saw that he had run it through the rafters of the porch and tied it to the bucket of syrup. Whatever mechanism he had rigged to pour the syrup had failed, and the whole bucket was now on the wrong victim's head. Luke finally succeeded in popping off the metal pail, and Mr. Whitaker saw the culprit standing in front of him, the rope still in his hand. Willard Tate! Oh, what in the Sam Hill were you thinking? Of all stupid dad blame ideas, bellowed the storekeeper. The frightened boy dropped the rope and ran off. I know where you live, boy! Mr. Whitaker shouted. Johann grabbed a towel and offered it to the man. As he helped to clean up the mess, Johann explained, Mr. Whitaker, it weren't me that did that other stuff. It was Willard. I mean, I've done other stuff, but not that other stuff, Johann confessed. Why in the world would that boy set such a contraption? The man asked. He heard you tell me to get the hickory nuts. It was set for me, 'cause he don't like me much, I guess. Mr. Tate appeared in the doorway, his white butcher's apron stained with red. What's all the ruckus out here? Well, Elias, Mr. Whitaker says, he wiped his face. I'm afraid it's your boy who's been up to no good. Mr. Tate shook his head. That boy of mine don't have any good sense. Never has. I tell him every day he needs to think, but he never does. As Johann listened to the man, he began to see Willard differently. Mr. Whitaker looked at Johann. Seems I owe you an apology, Johann. You done outstanding work here, and I'm pleased to have you, but I think we have the wrong boy working off the debt. Mr. Whitaker, if it's all right, I'd like to keep working. I have done other stuff I should probably work for, and I don't think Willard is ready just yet to do this kind of work. Well, if that's what you want, it's fine with me. But Elias, you're going to have to keep your boy away from my store. I think Michael and I might have something that will keep Willard good and busy for you, Mr. Tate, Johann offered. The next morning, 3 boys sat beneath a tree, gazing at the mountain beyond. Michael smiled and patted Willard's shoulder. How would you like to have an adventure? Willard, Johann said, there's a treasure on that mountain. We can help you find it. They would talk all afternoon, and in the morning, 2 boys would lead a friend on his journey to meet the good master. The end. Woo! Big finish to our story. Thanks for joining us on this big adventure, and thanks to Barbi for writing it. Very fun and very great ending. All right. You all have a good night.